The true cost of being unprepared isn't measured in the things you buy too late. It is measured in the quiet, invisible failures of the things you bought too early. Right now, across millions of suburban kitchens and basement storage rooms, a slow-motion mistake is hardening into concrete reality. People are looking at shelves stacked with heavy plastic buckets, freeze-dried survival rations, and rows of canned meat, feeling a profound sense of security. It is a comforting illusion, but it is a trap. When the supply chain stutters, not from a cinematic apocalypse, but from the messy, bureaucratic, hyperinflationary friction of the modern world, most of these stockpiles will fail their owners within 48 hours. Not because the food ran out, but because the 5 fundamental pillars of human dietary survival were left sitting on the grocery store shelf, completely ignored by shoppers who walked right past them this very week. This isn't about a lack of spending. It's about a fatal misunderstanding of human biology and logistics under pressure. We have been conditioned to think of preparation as an act of accumulation. More calories, more volume, more weight. But a 20-kilogram bag of unseasoned white rice is not a resource. It is a psychological burden if you lack the microscopic triggers required to make the human body actually digest it over an extended period. The open loop that almost every amateur prepper walks directly into is the phenomenon of appetite fatigue, a physiological dead end where the human body, under stress, begins rejecting monotonous food even while starving. The 5 items missing from most pantries right now aren't expensive. They aren't sold by specialized tactical supply companies, and they don't require a military background to understand. They are sitting in plain sight, priced under $5, masked by their own mundane familiarity. Experienced researchers and long-term preppers don't look at a crisis through the lens of a Hollywood movie. They look at it through the lens of metabolic efficiency and psychological friction. If you haven't secured these 5 specific items, your thousands of dollars of survival food are effectively useless. Let's start at the absolute foundation of human civilization, an item that defines the baseline of survival economics. Number 5. Salt. Walk down the baking aisle of any standard supermarket. A basic cardboard cylinder of iodized table salt costs less than a single liter of bottled water. Per dollar spent, it represents the single highest practical return on investment of anything you can physically place on a pantry shelf. Yet, because it is cheap and ubiquitous, it is treated as an afterthought. This is a severe, historically blind error. In a true economic or infrastructural disruption, people do not stop eating solely because the supermarkets are empty. They stop eating because every single meal begins to taste exactly like the one before it. Consider the reality of a sustained supply chain fracture. You are left relying on the standard survival baseline, a pot of plain boiled red beans and a bowl of white rice. On day 1, it is fuel. On day 2, it is tolerable. By day 4, an insidious physiological shift occurs. For children, for the elderly on medications that already suppress taste, and for adults operating under hypercortisol conditions, the sheer monotony of unflavored carbohydrates triggers a neurological rejection. Portions shrink. Meals are left half-finished. This isn't a matter of being picky. It is a documented metabolic response. A body under stress that refuses its food absorbs fewer proteins, loses cognitive sharpness, and experiences accelerated physical decay. A single pinch of salt isn't a culinary luxury. It is the chemical mechanism that forces the body to keep consuming the calories it desperately needs to survive. But the necessity of salt stretches far deeper into our geographic and historical identity than simple seasoning. Long before the invention of the electric compressor, before the first industrial refrigeration unit was bolted into shipping containers, salt was the primary technology that allowed human populations to survive the geographic trap of winter. It was infrastructure. Sailors crossing the Atlantic, frontiersmen pushing into frozen territories, and medieval communities all treated salt not as a condiment, but as a preservation currency. Today, we live with the fragile assumption that cold chains are permanent. We assume the chicken in our freezer will remain frozen because the grid has a 99.9% uptime. But 7 hours into a localized blackout, as the frost on your freezer door begins to sweat, that chicken transitions from an asset to a ticking biological clock. Without salt, that meat is a total loss within 24 hours. With it, you have a historical mechanism to cure, dry, and salvage the protein before bacteria reclaims it. The beauty of this foundational resource lies in its absolute stability. Salt has no metabolic expiration date. Kept dry, sealed against the creeping humidity of a basement floor, it requires no rotation, no checking of stamp dates, and no complex management. It simply waits. The real mistake isn't running out of salt during a crisis. It is assuming that a global logistical network operating on razor-thin margins will continue to transport a $2 heavy, low-profit margin product across thousands of miles of highway when fuel costs spike. The smart money doesn't buy specialty pink salt or artisan flakes. It buys the basic industrial-grade table salt, 2 canisters at a time, until the baseline is secure. Because when the system stops moving, the simplest things are always the first to vanish. To understand how the modern consumer became so structurally vulnerable, one must look at the structural design of the international food supply network. The immediate availability of calories in the 21st century is not a natural state of affairs. It is the result of a highly centralized, fragile, just-in-time logistical model. This model prioritizes efficiency over resilience. Historically, communities maintained localized grain reserves and decentralized storage facilities to buffer against crop failures or transport disruptions. Today, supermarket chains operate on a 3-day inventory cycle. If the trucks stop rolling, the shelves empty completely within 72 hours. This structural reality shifts the burden of survival entirely onto individual household pantries, where the selection of shelf-stable goods dictates long-term metabolic outcomes. This brings us to the 4th critical item on the list: dry beans. In terms of economic efficiency and nutritional density, dry legumes represent a massive leverage point for household security. In mainstream grocery retail, a standard 1-pound bag of dry pinto or black beans costs significantly less than a single serving of fresh animal protein. Yet when hydrated and cooked, that single bag expands to yield multiple pounds of nutrient-dense food. The nutritional profile of dry beans is highly specific. 1 cup of cooked legumes provides approximately 15 grams of protein, alongside a substantial payload of complex carbohydrates and dietary fiber. This combination stabilizes blood glucose levels and suppresses ghrelin, the hormone responsible for triggering the sensation of hunger. For a household operating under severe budgetary restrictions or navigating an interruption in fresh food distribution, this sustained satiety prevents nutritional panic. However, the primary value of dry beans lies in their total independence from modern cold chain infrastructure. Fresh meat is arguably the most logistically demanding commodity in the global economy. Every stage of its life cycle, from the slaughterhouse to the regional distribution hub, the refrigerated transport trailer, and finally the temperature-controlled display case, requires continuous, uncompromised electrical power. The moment a severe weather event, a cyber attack on a utility provider, or an energy grid failure disrupts the electrical continuity, the fresh meat supply chain collapses. Dry beans require no refrigeration, no climate-controlled shipping, and no specialized storage environments. A sealed bag can sit in a dark cupboard for years without losing its core macronutrient value. This is not a compromise in quality. It is a deliberate choice to remove systemic vulnerabilities from your household food supply. This asset becomes exponentially more powerful when paired with the 3rd item on the list: white rice. On their own, dry beans lack certain essential amino acids, specifically methionine and tryptophan. White rice, conversely, is rich in these specific amino acids but lacks lysine, which is abundant in beans. When consumed together within the same day, these 2 components form a complete protein profile, mimicking the amino acid structure found in meat. This synergy is not a discovery of modern laboratories. It is the exact geographic and historical baseline that sustained populations across Asia, Central America, and the Mediterranean for centuries. It allowed civilizations to build infrastructure and survive geographic traps without relying on continuous access to livestock. When integrating rice into a long-term pantry strategy, the specific variety selected introduces a major operational fork in the road. A frequent and costly mistake made by well-intentioned consumers is stockpiling brown rice, under the assumption that its higher micronutrient content makes it superior for emergency use. From an investigative and chemical standpoint, this choice is fundamentally flawed. Brown rice retains its outer bran and germ layers. These layers contain natural lipids and and fatty acids that are highly susceptible to oxidation. When exposed to ambient oxygen, heat, and humidity, these oils turn rancid within 6 to 12 months, rendering the grain unpalatable and metabolically toxic. White rice undergoes a milling process that completely strips away the oil-bearing bran layer, leaving behind the pure, starchy endosperm. Under proper storage conditions, sealed in airtight containers with oxygen absorbers and kept away from direct sunlight, white rice retains its nutritional integrity and caloric value for decades. The physical execution of storing these grains introduces another set of precise variables. Placing bulk bags of rice or beans directly onto a bare concrete floor in a basement or garage triggers a process known as vapor migration. Concrete is inherently porous. It continually draws moisture upward from the earth and releases it into the surrounding air. When a plastic or burlap sack sits on that cold surface, condensation forms at the point of contact. This moisture breeds mold and activates dormant insect larvae, destroying the contents from the bottom up. Preventing this failure requires basic material separation, utilizing wooden pallets, plastic shelving units, or heavy-duty food-grade buckets raised off the ground. Furthermore, dividing a large 50-pound sack into smaller half-gallon glass jars or mylar pouches protects the broader investment. Every time a bulk container is opened, it drafts fresh moisture and airborne fungal spores inside. By compartmentalizing the supply, the consumer ensures that 90% of their inventory remains hermetically sealed until the exact moment of consumption. The volatility of these staple goods is not merely a hypothetical scenario discussed by data analysts. It is actively reflected in global market behavior. The international trade of white rice is highly sensitive to geopolitical decisions and climate anomalies. For instance, when major agricultural nations experience domestic crop shortfalls due to shifting monsoon patterns, their governments routinely implement immediate export bans to protect their internal populations. Because global commodity markets operate on razor-thin margins of surplus, a single policy shift in New Delhi or Bangkok causes immediate price ripples across retail supermarkets in Chicago, London, and Sydney within weeks. Securing a physical reserve of these carbohydrates before international trade blocs tighten is a matter of basic administrative foresight. It removes your household from the immediate blast radius of global macroeconomic shocks, transforming an external supply crisis into a manageable internal routine. While grain networks face long-term macroeconomic pressures, immediate domestic supply disruptions often reveal vulnerabilities in breakfast and dairy categories. This brings the focus to the second foundational item on the list: rolled oats. Historically, agricultural data and civilian survival records demonstrate that oats provide an exceptionally high ratio of caloric density to financial investment. During industrial labor strikes, severe winter blizzards, and localized transport shutdowns, oats consistently serve as a primary emergency caloric buffer. The physical structure of a rolled oat is highly stable. Unlike whole oat groats, which require extensive boiling times to break down tough outer hulls, rolled oats undergo a mechanical steaming and flattening process. This industrial pre-cooking allows them to be prepared rapidly using minimal thermal energy, an essential consideration when local gas or electrical utilities are offline. The nutritional data regarding rolled oats clarifies their role as a metabolic anchor. A single 1/2 cup serving of dry oats contains approximately 150 calories, 5 grams of vegetable protein, and 4 grams of dietary fiber, including beta-glucan. Beta-glucan is a soluble fiber that forms a viscous gel inside the digestive tract. This biochemical action delays gastric emptying and slows the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. The practical result is a prolonged sensation of fullness and a stable release of physical energy over several hours. For vulnerable demographics, particularly retirees living on fixed incomes, this specific metabolic profile acts as a financial buffer. When inflationary spikes reduce the purchasing power of a monthly pension check, substituting commercial, sugar-dense breakfast cereals with bulk rolled oats allows a household to maintain their baseline caloric intake without expanding their grocery expenditure. Furthermore, rolled oats exhibit a high degree of operational flexibility under austere conditions. If a power outage disables standard kitchen appliances, rolled oats do not require active boiling to become digestible. Submerging the flakes in ambient temperature water or rehydrated milk for several hours initiates a process of passive hydration, breaking down the starches sufficiently for human consumption. Mechanically, dry oats can also be pulverized using a manual hand grinder to create a coarse, gluten-free flour suitable for extending meat dishes or baking basic flatbreads. In terms of inventory management, traditional rolled oats outperform instant, pre-packaged oat varieties across every measurable metric. Commercial instant oat packets are highly processed, frequently loaded with sodium and refined sugars, and carry a retail markup of several 100% per pound compared to bulk canisters. More critically, the added moisture and sugars in instant varieties accelerate degradation inside the packaging, shortening their viable shelf life under ambient pantry conditions. The single most critical vulnerability in the vast majority of household food reserves, however, is a profound deficit in high-quality, water-soluble proteins and essential minerals. This brings us directly to the number one item on the list: powdered milk. A standard pantry packed with hundreds of pounds of white rice, pasta and dry beans is structurally incomplete. While these starch-heavy inventories successfully prevent immediate starvation, they fail to provide the precise physiological inputs required to maintain lean muscle mass, cellular repair and bone density over a sustained period of disruption. This nutritional gap represents a silent vector for physical decline, particularly among adults over 65 years of age. Under the physiological stress of an extended emergency, the human body increases its output of cortisol, a hormone that accelerates the breakdown of muscle tissue to synthesize glucose. Without a highly bioavailable source of complete protein to counteract this catabolic state, individuals experience rapid muscle wasting, cognitive fatigue, and a severely compromised immune response. Reconstituted non-fat dry milk resolves this systemic vulnerability directly. One single cup of prepared powdered milk delivers 8 grams of complete protein, containing all 9 essential amino acids necessary for human cellular maintenance. It also supplies approximately 30% of the established daily value for calcium, alongside vital payloads of potassium and phosphorus. These minerals are not optional dietary enhancements. They are critical chemical regulators required for cardiac function, muscle contraction, and neurological signaling. In a prolonged supply chain fracture where access to fresh dairy, eggs, and meat is completely severed, a physical inventory of powdered milk is the fastest, most logistically viable mechanisms to inject these critical macronutrients back into a household population. The logistical architecture of powdered milk also highlights the necessity of prioritizing non-fat varieties over full-fat alternatives for long-term storage. Whole milk powder contains milk fat, or lipids, which possess a molecular structure that reacts rapidly with atmospheric oxygen. Even when packaged in commercial tins, these fats eventually undergo oxidative rancidity, generating a sharp, unpalatable taste and toxic free radicals within 12 to 18 months. Non-fat dry milk has had nearly all lipid content mechanically removed during the dehydration process. When stored in a cool, dark environment within an airtight container equipped with a food-grade oxygen scavenger, non-fat dry milk maintains its full nutritional profile and solubility for years, beyond its direct nutritional utility. Powdered milk plays a vital role in mitigating appetite fatigue across a population. In extended crises, the psychological friction of consuming identical, unflavored rations day after day results in voluntary calorie restriction, particularly among children and the elderly. Reconstituted milk alters the texture and flavor profile of secondary pantry items. Stirring a measure of dry milk powder into a pot of rolled oats or a basic vegetable broth instantly increases its caloric density, improves its mouthfeel, and mimics the familiar culinary structures of